I worked as a cashier at a gas station along a highway in upstate New York. It was a cold Sunday in October, just before 5 p.m., almost the end of my shift. I couldn't wait to leave. The day had been quiet until then. While I was organizing the cash register, a man walked into the store. He had an unkempt beard, dirty hair, and wore a worn-out hoodie with dark stains and ripped jeans. He took a few hesitant steps and then stopped near the aisles, looking around as if he were nervous. "Can I help you?" I asked in a neutral tone. He didn't answer right away. He kept turning around as if someone was following him. Then, in a whisper, he said, "Where are the restrooms?" I pointed to the door at the back, on the right, trying to hide my discomfort. The man walked in that direction, but as he moved, he kept glancing at me. Something about him unsettled me. As soon as my coworker arrived for the shift change, I grabbed my backpack and quickly left the gas station. I had plans to meet my friend, Ryan, for a meal at the nearby diner. I headed straight there, trying to shake off that strange feeling. Entering the diner, I felt more at ease. I sat with Ryan, and we ordered 2 burgers with fries. But when I looked up toward the nearby tables, my heart skipped a beat. The man from the gas station was there, sitting a few tables away, staring at me. "Ryan, that's the man I saw earlier," I whispered, trying not to be noticed. Ryan turned quickly, then looked back at me. "Maybe it's just a coincidence," he said casually. I nodded, but deep inside, my unease grew. After dinner, Ryan and I got in the car to go home. The drive would take about 30 minutes. I tried to put it out of my mind. But at the first red light, I turned toward the car next to us, and my blood ran cold. It was him. The man was sitting in his old white sedan, staring at me. "Ryan, it's him again," I said in a whisper. Ryan noticed him, and this time, his face grew serious. "Okay, that's weird." For safety, when we reached our neighborhood, we drove around the block a couple of times to make sure no one was following us. Everything seemed fine. Finally, Ryan dropped me off in front of my house. I quickly went inside and locked the door. I was alone, my mom and sister were out, and my dad was away for work. I tried not to think about it and got under the covers. But a few minutes later, I heard a noise at the window. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest. Slowly, I got out of bed and moved toward the window, slightly pulling back the curtain. That's when I saw him. The man was in my yard, standing under the streetlight, with a disturbing grin on his face. He was staring directly at me. I jumped back and grabbed my phone to call the police. But when they arrived, he was gone. The next day, I quit my job at the gas station. I never saw that man again. But even today, whenever I'm alone in a parking lot or at a stoplight, I can't help but check if someone is staring at me. I was finishing my closing shift at Mike's Diner, a place where I had been working for almost a year. It was one of those nights when the rain poured relentlessly, making the city almost deserted. Nights like these meant fewer customers, and honestly, I didn't mind. My shift ended at midnight, and up until then, the evening had been slow, almost boring. Around 11:30, the door opened, and a man and a much younger girl walked in. He must have been around 40, while she looked barely in her 20s. They both looked at me right away, so I walked over to ask how many they were. 2, the man replied calmly. I led them to a table and handed them the menu. They took a while to decide, speaking in hushed tones. When they finally ordered, the man started a conversation with me. I've always been a talkative person, maybe that's why I've always done well in hospitality. Besides, there wasn't much to do, so I gladly chatted with them. Strangely, the girl barely spoke. He did most of the talking, and eventually, I started directing my questions more toward him. I don't remember every detail of the conversation, but one thing stuck with me. At one point, he asked, "Do you live alone?" I did live alone, and I still do. I answered honestly, saying I lived about 10 minutes away, in a very quiet, somewhat isolated area. At the time, I saw nothing suspicious about the question. It was a bit odd, sure, but the girl's presence made me automatically dismiss any negative thoughts. I kept chatting and joking, then stepped away from their table. About 45 minutes later, they finished eating and left. An hour passed, and my coworkers and I were closing up. After saying goodbye to everyone, I rushed to my car to avoid getting too wet. The rain was still heavy, and I drove slowly for safety. When I got home, I ran to the front door to take cover as quickly as possible. My apartment was on the first floor of a house divided into 3 units. The main entrance led to an internal staircase connecting the 3 apartments. Since I was on the first floor, I could enter directly through the main door. As soon as I set my keys on the kitchen counter, I heard frantic knocking at the door. It was almost 1 a.m. I immediately thought of one of the other tenants, but when I got closer, I saw a girl on the other side of the glass door. She was completely drenched, with the hood of a gray hoodie pulled up, partially covering her face. She was begging me to let her in to use the phone. I didn't open right away. I wanted to understand the situation better. I asked if she was lost. She replied that a man was following her and that she needed help. But something about her seemed strangely familiar. Then, suddenly, it clicked. I looked at her closely and asked, "You were at the diner, right?" She didn't answer. Maybe she didn't hear me. Then she turned toward the street again, and with terror in her eyes, she started shouting, "There he is, he's there." I looked over her shoulder. A large, burly man was slowly approaching my house. And at that moment, I realized I knew him. It was him. The man from the diner. The girl looked at me with a mix of fear and confusion as if expecting me to open the door immediately. But I didn't. When she realized I was hesitating, she turned to the man and screamed, "Go away." Then the man started running toward the door. I slammed the inner door shut and turned the key in the lock. Silence. I didn't hear banging or any attempts to force the entrance. But I had no intention of opening to check. I ran up the internal stairs to knock on the upstairs tenant's door. I pounded with my fist several times. No answer. I tried the downstairs apartment, but nothing. Looking out the window, I confirmed what I already suspected: none of my neighbors' cars were parked outside. I was completely alone in the house. I went back to my apartment and locked the staircase door. My heart was pounding as I tried to make sense of it. The most obvious explanation. It was a trick to make me open the door. And at that moment, I understood why that man had asked if I lived alone. I sat on the couch, trying to calm down. Outside, the rain kept falling. I thought about calling the police, but I didn't do it right away. After a few minutes, I decided to go to the bathroom to get ready for bed. As I was brushing my teeth, I heard a noise. I froze. Someone was knocking. It was coming from the staircase door. I stepped out of the bathroom and quietly approached. "Who is it?" I asked firmly. No answer. I called out the names of the other tenants, but nothing. Then I shouted, "If you don't identify yourself, I'm calling the police." Another knock. My heart stopped for a second. Then a voice on the other side whispered something. I froze. "Your blood, on me." Fear exploded in my chest. I ran to my room, locked the door, and grabbed my phone. I called 911 and hid in the closet while speaking to the operator. Every noise made me jump. The rain, the wind, the storm. 10 minutes. They felt like an eternity. Then the operator's voice told me to open for the officers. I stepped out, trembling, and ran to the front door. After listening to my story, the officers inspected the area. They advised me not to sleep there for a few days. I didn't think twice. I packed a bag with essentials and drove to my parents' house. The next morning, I returned to the apartment. Everything seemed normal until my upstairs neighbor knocked on the staircase door. I opened it, and he asked, "What the hell is this?" He pointed behind him. When I looked, a shiver ran down my spine. There was a message written in marker on the door, "Thanks for the service, Emily." My blood ran cold. After that incident, I could no longer sleep there. I stayed with my parents for weeks, then found a new apartment, not too far away. Better not take any chances. I live in the state of Colorado, in the heart of the Rocky Mountains. Until recently, I worked as a cashier in a small diner along a back road that crossed the area. I was 29 years old and worked the closing shift. Most nights, the diner closed at 2 a.m., quite late considering the area was sparsely populated. However, thanks to the nearby road, there was always someone stopping by to eat, even at that hour. Since I grew up in the Midwest, I can tell you that people here are different. In the Midwest, there's a strong emphasis on politeness and conversation. But here, people are kind, yes, but not particularly talkative. It seems like the mountain air encourages a bit of introversion. I had worked as a waitress in Chicago, and I can tell you that customers there were much more sociable. Here, people seem more inclined to keep to themselves. That night, the closing shift was approaching. The kitchen would close at 2. Even though the diner was advertised as closing at that time, it wasn't exactly welcomed if someone placed a last-minute order. But, as always, it happened, and that night was no exception. There were only 2 employees in the diner, me and the cook. It was about 1:50 a.m. when a burly man walked in alone. He wore high-waisted pants, a gray t-shirt tucked into a brown jacket, had a mustache and glasses. I asked if he wanted to sit at the counter or a table, and he chose a table. He kept smiling, so I smiled back. I handed him a menu and informed him the kitchen was closing soon. He glanced at the menu for a few seconds, then said he'd like black coffee and pancakes. At that moment, he introduced himself as Mark. His order was simple, and it didn't bother me. I went into the kitchen and gave the order to the cook, who seemed a bit annoyed, but I responded with a smile, as if to say I understood. As I walked out of the kitchen, Mark gestured to get my attention. He was approaching me with an unusual air for that hour, and he started talking. He asked if I was from the area and began complaining about roadwork. I replied that I was local and explained that the repairs were due to the harsh winter cold. We talked about trivial things, but when he started asking personal details, it seemed like he was flirting. It didn't bother me. I was used to it from my time working in Chicago. Since Mark was the last customer of the night, the cook brought him his plate. I took his order and walked to his table. Once Mark finished eating, I brought him the bill, subtly signaling that we were closing. He paid by card and left. The cook handled closing duties, so while I cleaned his table and gathered my things, I said goodbye to my coworker and headed to my car. There were 3 cars in the parking lot, mine, the cook's, and a third I couldn't explain. It was an older car, maybe a Toyota or a Honda, I wasn't sure. I also couldn't tell if anyone was inside since the windows were tinted. I wondered if it was Mark's car. I got in my car and started the 20-minute drive home. After a few minutes, I heard a strange noise from the dashboard. The tire pressure warning light turned on. I panicked. I had never changed a tire before, nor had I called roadside assistance. I was still quite far from home, and the tire pressure was dropping fast. From 20, it fell to 10 in seconds. Then, I started to feel not just the steering wheel shaking, but the entire car trembling. I had to pull over. I quickly stopped and got out to check the tire. It was completely flat. Suddenly, as if on cue, a pair of headlights turned on down the road, approaching me and slowing to a stop. I rushed back into my car and locked the door. I had no idea what to do. Then, there was a light knock on the window. I looked up and saw Mark, the man from the diner. He greeted me with a smile. He was wearing gloves. To be clear, I'll use a fake name for myself, but he called me by name, Michelle, are you okay? Laughing, as if this was some coincidence, I immediately felt a knot in my stomach. I knew he had done this on purpose. I'm not that naive. He gestured for me to roll down the window. I rolled it down just a few centimeters, enough to talk without opening it too much. He asked if I needed help. I told him I had a flat tire. Pretending not to understand, he asked which one. I pointed to the rear passenger side tire. He walked around to check, and in that moment, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. I left the phone in my lap while Mark returned to my side. He smiled that eerie smile, saying he knew how to change a tire. He asked me to step out of the car, but I replied that my fiancé was on his way to help. As all this happened, I could hear the 911 operator's voice, but not loud enough for Mark to hear. I tried to convey my situation without being too obvious. In the end, I said I didn't know how it happened, but I was waiting for my fiancé. Thanks for offering to help, sir. He stood there for a moment, his expression less friendly, then stepped away from the window. I took that moment to whisper to the operator, saying that this man had slashed my tire and was trying to get me out of the car. The operator asked where I was, and I quickly pulled up my map to give the name of the road where I had stopped. Suddenly, the deafening sound of shattering glass to my left made me scream as shards fell onto my lap. I screamed at the top of my lungs at the man, I'm on the phone with the police. It's the police. I showed him my phone screen. He looked at it, then reached inside the car. I screamed again, sobbing, afraid he was going to grab or strangle me, but instead, he snatched my phone and threw it onto the road. Then, he ran to his car and sped off into the dark. I heard the tires screech as he made a sharp right turn and disappeared. I wanted to go after my phone, but with no flashlight in my car, I would have had to step out into total darkness. The only light came from my car. I had no choice but to wait and pray that Mark, or whatever his real name was, didn't come back. I heard the unmistakable sound of police sirens in the distance and started crying with relief when I realized they were getting closer. I stepped out of my car and waved my arms until I saw flashing lights turn off the main road onto the side road. Shortly after, a second police car arrived, then a third. During all of this, they found my phone, completely destroyed, and I described the man in his car to the officers, pointing in the direction he had gone. One of the officers drove off that way, while the others spread the news over the radio. They were truly the kindest police officers I had ever met. They changed my tire, and one of them escorted me home, making sure I followed. He told me they would check the diner's security footage and keep me updated. A week later, I got a call from that officer, saying the investigation was still ongoing, thanks to the surveillance footage. That was the last I ever heard about it. I don't think they ever caught that man. Unfortunately, I never returned to work at that diner after that night. I didn't want to risk him finding me again.